Okay, listeners, if you love us, we want to share with you about a fun and fellow podcast that you need to check out. It's called Back Alley Banter and is hosted by two fellow pod friends of ours named Kat and Maya. Just like us, they are real, candid, and talk about some relevant shit that will definitely make you think, but also have you laughing along with them. They are two flight attendants, one Canadian, one a South African. One raised by hippies in the 70s, the other grew up in a strict, conservative Christian household. Both have a lot to say, and they often don't see eye to eye, but they always agree to disagree and have each other giggle along the way. Kat and Maya always have a laugh while discussing the taboo, mainstream, and, well, everything else in between. It's genuinely like having two unedited gal friends alongside of you on an impromptu road trip. No rules, no destination, and always a good, unapologetic conversation with something to be learned along the way. And they give away free shit too, just for downloading or subscribing. So check out our buddies Kat and Maya on their podcast called Back Alley Banter. You can find them on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you find your podcasts. Simply search Back Alley Banter on your preferred podcast platform. You can also follow them on Instagram at Back Alley Banter and or friend them on Facebook at Kat and Maya as the first name and Back Alley Banter as the last name. Or if you want to connect with them on email, just send them an email at backalleybanter@gmail.com. Search, download, follow, or friend. That's Back Alley Banter on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts.
So welcome back, everybody. We are so happy to be here. We're kicking off season 2, and to do so, we have very special guests with us here today. I'm not going to introduce them because I'm going to mess it up, so I will let our special guests introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Jacob Lynn. My pronouns are he, him. I am a theater designer and playwright based out of Toronto, and I suffer from toxic masculinity.
Hello there, everybody. My name is Zach Colangelo. My current pronouns are he, she, they, them. I identify as a non-binary emerging artist who is currently based in King City and the Tkaronto Treaty 13 landscape. And I'm very excited to be here today because I am a victim of toxic masculinity.
I didn't know this was an AA meeting. My name's Gavin McDonald, and it was your joke. It was Jessica's joke from earlier. I'm Gavin McDonald. I'm a lighting and media designer in theater, and I teach up at York University, which is where I used to teach at Jessica, Julian, and Jacob. And I am a long sufferer of toxic masculinity.
Well, we are so excited to have you guys here. I know this is like a really intense conversation, but we're going to do our best to just share our experiences, all of our perspectives, and listen to each other, and it's going to be great.
Yeah, I think when we've spoken about toxic masculinity, it's mostly been from like obviously our female perspective, and it hasn't really gone past that. And I think typically, other than the last few years, that's where it's kind of been focused around, like females dealing, like the women dealing with toxic masculinity and how that pertains to like art, culture, the patriarchy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we're super interested in hearing everybody else's experience, especially because all three of you come from all walks of life, different cultures, different experiences. So we would just love to get started.
When did you first hear the term toxic masculinity and then be like, oh, that's what that is? Like, when did you guys first hear about it? Anybody can go first, just jump in.
The actual term of toxic masculinity, I want to say in university like 3 years ago. I've always understood it to be the thing that exists, but the actual like verbatim of toxic masculinity, 3 years ago, which is interesting because it just goes to show how long it's been that people critically discuss it.
I'd say probably the term. It's a really good question. Like Zach, I always was conscious and clear of the forces at play, but I didn't have that term used to my knowledge until wow, that's a really good question. I really think actually when I was in university.
Yeah.
Because it's certainly something we didn't talk about in high school. And to put this in perspective, me being in university was 1995 through 2000. So it's I think part of it has to do with university is a place where you start to get a lot of information about different points of view. While in high school, you're kind of told what the view should be, and in university, you have more freedom and independence to kind of find your own path and search for more information. You have access to a lot more information and a lot more points of view as well, instead of like 3 different teachers in different homerooms or something like that. So, for instance, we didn't, and again, this was in like the late 90s, which I know sounds insane in this with everyone else in this room, but we didn't talk about anyone in our high school as being openly gay, like at all. Because it just, no one would come out. And even though there were many of us who were supportive, it was like no one was out because no one was comfortable doing so, because that was the environment. And now my and it's a different conversation, but at the same time, but like now my daughter, who is 13, has been yelling from the rooftops that she's bi. So it's how the conversation has evolved is very different. So, but even back then in like university, toxic masculinity was an active conversation of people deconstructing why are I don't know if we swear on this thing. Oh, you guys swear?
Oh my god!
You guys swear? Yeah.
Are you fucking kidding me, guys?
Yeah, exactly. But basically, why are men such assholes, and why are we told to be, and like why are we intentionally taught to be as a standard? Was starting the active intellectual and academic discussion about it. I wasn't really aware of until university.
Great.
Why are men assholes should be put on a t-shirt, and I will buy that shit and wear it. I swear to God.
Yeah.
Not that women can't be assholes, but men are actively taught to be assholes.
Yeah.
That's one of the differences.
It's with intent. There's a psychology behind it. Yeah, no, I would agree with you. I would say that like if you had asked me, do you know the term toxic masculinity, like in high school, I probably would have been like, that sounds familiar, but like not that it ever entered like any discussions. Like I think the most I ever got with my girlfriends was just being like, yeah, guys are like, and like we do like a really stupid male impression, like that's not accurate at all. And we're like, because that's the way that they think and talk and act. So, which is like degrading.
We used to speak about it as broness. Right?
Yes,
like that's where
we did.
That was our vocabulary of it. Because you're like, he's such a fucking bro, like he can't even and that was like quite literally the voice we used. And it's also the voice we used to like impersonate our fathers. But like it's just that's I didn't like same thing, like the term did you see me do that? The term again was familiar, but like I wouldn't use it in a sentence until university also, which again says a lot. Because Gavin, I think you mentioned something really important about the high school experience, which we've beaten this dead horse a number of times on this podcast. But it's just no, don't be sorry, but it's because it's so true that in high school it's so homogeneous that you're not allowed to think any other way or do anything that's apart from what you're being told, right? So it's really interesting point that it came from somebody other than us two for once.
Well, and also not to like be so targeted, but obviously like we came from a high school where we knew that there was like a ton of gay people, but people again, like the conversations would happen amongst friends, but it wasn't something you wanted to shout from the rooftops. Like it's not where like Abby is now. Like people didn't have that kind of confidence. And Zach, I don't know if you maybe want to speak to that.
I was actually going to jump in. I was going to jump in because we went to an arts high school. So essentially it was a community that, you know, is built on queer people and a community that kind of like accelerates the queer narrative in so many ways. And I know for me, like, I'll talk about this even a little bit later, but I've always been a person who's just been visibly queer. Obviously, like, hello, like, we're here in a beat today, so we are visibly queer. But even, like, it took years to get to this level of confidence. And even in those moments where I, like, kind of was very insular, it didn't matter. My queerness always showed. It was always visible. And whether I made it a statement or not, people noticed it, and it was up for ridicule. So in high school, the thing is I was very fortunate to be in a position where it was just generally understood that I was one of the queer kids. So I never had to have that like uncomfortable moment of, I'm gay, everybody. I just need to let you all know. I never had to have that come to God moment. People just kind of understood that this is the essence of who Zach is. And yeah, I never needed to discuss it because it was just a given. But yeah, definitely I see what you're saying, Jess, that it was a thing that within quiet silence, we all knew who those people were.
Yes.
But whether those people needed to have a coming out moment, it didn't necessarily exist in our space.
And
No.
Jacob, you were nodding too, like, yeah, you don't need that silent moment, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like in our generation, like coming out has become less of an important thing, and it's really just a personal journey.
Yeah. No, for sure. And it's actually interesting. Sorry, not to get too off topic, but it is something I want to discuss at least one point, maybe on another episode. But just the idea of like being around, especially with the environment at York, like there is no shame to be found when it comes to like coming out, acknowledging if you're gay. Like, but it's crazy because it's like that is something where, you know, trigger warning, but like some kids would be driven to suicide over something like that, coming to terms with their own sexuality. So it's crazy to live in a time where people are like, yeah, I'm gay, and it's like not a big deal. Like everyone's just so comfortable with it, and it's something to be celebrated first, then like, you know, feared and be ashamed of. So
I actually kind of tying this back with toxic masculinity more on like a patriarchal level. Gavin, when you were saying like in high school the environment to come out just like wasn't safe enough to, not safe enough, but it wasn't comfortable enough to be talking about it. And you were in grade 12 when you said 1995.
I was graduating in the spring of 95 when there was still a grade 13 in Ontario, so it was OAC.
Class of 95. But I'm just that's from the movie Just Friends, if anybody has seen that. Great. Okay. But I'm curious to know, because you're just kind of coming off of the wave of the AIDS epidemic, and I'm wondering if that had a lot to do with like still the stigma being around of being queer and that kind. Zach is like leaning in,
That's
being like,
that's some good fucking shit question. That's a good question.
I think it's an excellent question. I think I would be giving myself too much credit to say that I had the awareness to truly appreciate at that age kind of how prolific it was and the impact. I mean, it was there. We were hyper aware of like all of the, when you're in school and you're taught about STDs and safe sex and everything. At least if you, hopefully you got taught about this in high school earlier. Abby's had that conversation in like grade 6, which is great.
Nope.
So, or grade 7.
I was gonna say lucky Abby because I was like, bitch, where? Not high school, not elementary school.
But we went to Catholic school. Is Abby in public school?
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
It's also like when I was in high school, I don't remember. I think we learned about it in health class eventually, but anyways, but not until high school, which is well after people have already been like, and we're talking late high school, so people have already been having sex at this point. Mm-hmm. But anyways, when we were learning about this, AIDS was the big scare. Like way more of a scare than it is now. It is still obviously something to be concerned about, but now there is STDs, and here are all the STDs you can get. And then if you have unprotected sex, you will likely get AIDS, was the conversation. There was very subtle implication and suggestion that there was greater risk of it if you were gay. And but I don't, you know what? I'm honestly, see, this is the thing. I have to say, in high school, I was definitely one of the kids who was, just in high school, one of the people who's like, hey, everybody, how's everyone doing? Everything's great. Everything's cool. So.
In your kilt.
Yeah, in my kilt. No, I didn't have a kilt until I got married. So so I wasn't like hyper aware of the struggles of it. Wasn't impacting me is the short version. I wasn't as aware of it because I didn't have the struggle. I didn't have to worry about it. I was a cis straight white guy running around, totally comfortable in his skin, and like any other high schooler, didn't like how I looked really, and was self-conscious about that. But I wasn't worried about my sexuality, and I wasn't worried about fitting in over and above being a theater geek and going, oh, I guess like sports guys and I don't get along. Oh, we get along. Cool. Hey guys. And then you'd hear someone call. See, I can't say it. I'd hear homophobic slurs. Yeah, and I know it's for me personally, I don't like using any slurs at all. So, but without me, I know there's. I am not saying that
we
people
got
who
you.
want,
You know what?
yeah,
You know what the slurs are. We got you.
I know, but I'm not judging anyone who uses them to reclaim the words and use them and everything like that at all. But for me, I'm never comfortable using them. Anyways, we heard homophobic slurs, very commonly. And they always rubbed me the wrong way, but they didn't make me as angry as they did now.
Yeah.
Because at the time I didn't know, good friends of mine were gay, and I never thought about it. I just knew there was this, like, this makes me uncomfortable because this is a hurtful thing to say to people, but it's an abstract concept.
Yeah.
But if I was gay at the time, or not even then, this is the other thing. It was, you were less than if you weren't, like, you were called those things if you weren't, wrapping it back around. You were called those things if you weren't man enough. Mm-hmm. And if you weren't living up to an expectation of what that masculinity is, then that was, very rarely was it poisonous and like vindictive, like it wasn't Glee. It's not American high schools on television always baffle me because I'm like, is this American High School or is it just TV version of American High School? Because stereotypes are easy. But I got along with pretty much everyone, but even then it was like good natured, and like slur here and there when you weren't living up to an expectation of what being a man was. And I didn't know at the time that one of my very good friends was gay. And then after, years and years later, when I found out, and he's a wonderful person who is married now to his partner, and they're in the UK, and he's happy and at peace with himself. And every time I think about high school, I go, oh my God, what must that have been like? Mm-hmm. And because he's a good friend of mine and I care about him. So I can't imagine with that level of having to live up to an expectation of what being a man is, as you're trying to figure out how you are as a young man, is I think would have been a much more challenging experience.
May I also just add a comment on this? Because I was going to say, obviously, I did not live in that time of the AIDS epidemic. And I also feel as if, the understanding of the AIDS epidemic has entirely skipped a generation, that people our age do not know the impact of what that was. And also, just to be clear, there is an entire age group of people who were killed due to the AIDS epidemic. So we are missing an entire gap in queer culture that had that epidemic been realized as an epidemic at the time, we would have had an even better queer community than we currently have. But funny that we're talking about pandemics being in the middle of one right now, because one of the biggest things that I want to add is the fact that there was so much absenteeism in the AIDS epidemic that the government refused to help. The government refused to acknowledge it as a problem. There was the whole thing about AZT and that being a legitimate drug when it was in fact an illegitimate drug. It did not do anything. There was no information at all. So I appreciate Gavin's point in the sense where it's like, you have this idea of masculinity that people need to rise to. You have this idea of masculinity that all of these queer people at the time had to meet in order to pass and keep themselves safe, many of whom were unable to do so because queerness queerness is visible. Queerness has to be shown. So that's an unrealistic expectation in and of itself. And then you have this looming epidemic that people are going to be using as a target on you to kind of like make you feel stained and make you feel disgusting. So you have all of these things surrounding you that just make the fight to appear masculine and to meet a certain societal norm even more important. So I totally see what you're saying, because I felt that certainly in high school to a certain respect. And then eventually when I realized that I was in the community that I was in, being an arts community, I ended up being myself at the time in the ways that I could. But I totally appreciate your point of what could that have been like? Because it was definitely something that, because there was so much mystery to it, and because people didn't want to discuss it and be transparent in the ways that COVID has been, definitely an added challenge.
Well, I think like what both of you have made a really great point of saying is just the fact that like while masculinity can be toxic to others, it's also toxic for yourself, right? And this pressure to appear as like a manly man and be as masculine as possible is also more of a response to fear. And it's a coping mechanism for survival in whatever form that takes. Surviving high school, literally surviving and not getting like arrested and you know, abused. Like it's more than just like, oh, well, he's showing some toxic masculinity right now. It's about like, well, that's coming from a place of feeling absolutely petrified that if you're not that something bad's going to happen to you. So that's something that I think needs to be part of the conversation, especially with men.
I want to thank you guys for sharing that. You know, I think it's an important conversation that's not talked about. And, you know, in doing my research for this topic, because again, like all I know is my experience and the female experience, but you know, I was looking at people that I idolize, like Billy Porter, like Jonathan Van Ness, that have just like destroyed these ideals of of masculinity in itself and femininity and what those binaries even mean, but like more so like listening to what they had to say about their experience, because specifically with Billy Porter, like he addresses the fact that, you know, he grew up in this during like the AIDS epidemic, and he saw his friends die, and he was with, you know, his friends dying, and how he's overcome his own experience. Like he knew he was gay. His parents sent him to a therapist when he was 5 years old, like that kind of mentality years and years ago. And just, again, sorry, going back, but he mentioned a great point. Sorry, I wrote this down because I was really moved by it. He said so many great things, but he said masculinity silenced him for years because it was like my masculinity was in question before he could even comprehend the thought. And that flamboyant was a word that was used to marginalize him, and that the patriarchy is masculine. So subconsciously, we live in a space where we all receive the message that masculinity is better. And then reading about, you know, like toxic masculinity in the LGBTQIA community and like in the queer community, what that means, and using like isms and femininity to shame somebody. So, you know, calling, this is like a really old word that we used to use in elementary school, but like saying someone is a sissy, which now has been like reclaimed in some cases, but, you know, using like these ideas of toxic masculinity to shame someone because they're too femme, because of all these other different reasons, ableism, racism, you know, it all kind of coincides, but just
it all intersects. It all intersects.
Yeah. It's just, but it all comes from the idea that masculine is better. Masculine is what the ideal is, and that's the standard. So that was really interesting for me, at least, to read about.
So with all three of you, like, could you share some experiences where you have seen it amongst friends, like a toxic masculinity exchange that you notice within your like inner circles, or having like actual experiences where you're like, oh yeah, that's what that is. Did I participate? Did I not participate? Did I notice it at the time? Like anything where you guys can sort of give like some concrete examples, because I think we've done a lot of great theory talk, but yeah, just sort of diving right in.
Yeah, on that specific note, there were many instances in my childhood where, like I said, I felt very often that I fell victim to masculinity. And I identify as non-binary now as a way to distance myself from it, because masculinity for me, I put out the question of masculinity in quotations because I think it's such a far-fledged thing now that I don't even know if we're in touch with what exactly it even entails anymore. It's such a cloudy thing. But for me specifically, growing up, it manifested a lot in sports because I grew up in a very small town where the general expectation was that every single boy child would play sports, specifically hockey. So whenever you would find yourself in a given group of people who you've met, who you've not met, they would always ask, so what team are you playing? Or so how's the game? How's hockey? And I never had an answer for them because sports never interested me. And it was like, the minute I was like, oh, I don't play hockey, it was almost as if I was insulting them, me saying that. And it was like, you don't? Then what do you do? How can you be a human in this town that we live in if you do not play hockey? That's the way that it manifested for me. And then I also had a really hard time going to those sports games because I had brothers who played. So obviously I had to go and support them at the times that I did. And that was really hard. So that was the way that it manifested for me, was the fact that it was sports. Hockey, sports. You saw the epitome of what everybody recognized to be the ideal man. And then even in elementary school and in high school, you see these athletes and everybody swooning over the athletes being like, oh, look at the epitome of manliness and this person who is an athlete and who meets this rigorous standard of masculinity. So that's the way that it definitely was prevalent for me. Also, one more thing I'll mention, simply, Julia can relate, we're both Italian, tons of toxic masculinity in Italian culture. It just exists. There's a big, there's very clear-cut gender roles in a traditional family where the man is the man of the house and the woman cooks, the woman cleans, the man makes the bills, comes home, expects things to be done for him. The men can kind of get to say whatever they want. There's very clear-cut roles there. So throughout my entire childhood, I definitely saw it. And what was difficult was not responding to it, because I would see it and I just wouldn't say anything because I didn't identify with it. I never felt inclined to say anything. And even in the moments where I was victim and I was the one being made fun of, what do? I had all of these people coming at me and I was the only person who was able to defend myself, and it took me years to learn how to do that. So that's where I saw it manifest. Childhood, definitely.
Yeah. I was very lucky that in high school I had a great group of friends that helped me through shit. But during childhood, sports was definitely something that it came out as. But also the idea of violence was really prevalent because my friends would all play COD. They would have Nerf wars. And I was like, I don't want to hold this gun, guys. Just let me dance.
Imagine Jacob with a Nerf. I can't even picture it.
Oh my gosh, it was horrible. But yeah, it really came out in those ways, and it wasn't until high school where I was really like, hey guys, just let me dance and sing and lie on stage, and we'll be good. But another way where it also really came out was the gender roles within my culture as well. Being the firstborn son, there's a really big emphasis on that. And I see it both through me and my father, because once the women are married out, they're technically not even part of the family anymore. So my father had to take over so much responsibility. And while siblings and stuff don't have to do anything, and that pressure on a person to live up to that, especially when it's put on a child, really reinforces a lot of the toxic masculinity.
There's I mean, I found pretty early on that the standard of one thing that we were talking about when I was a kid, but we weren't really talking about with boys yet, was obviously about how toxic expectations of female gender roles were. And because they were all about less than and less than and less than. But I think what I was conscious of was the pressure to be a winner, and the way you won was through aggression. And sometimes, I mean, to be fair, aggression is sometimes necessary and helpful. Like, you have to know how to stand up for yourself. And that doesn't mean fighting people. It means standing up for yourself and having confidence in yourself. But, like, all of the things associated with it were about power and strength, aggression, combat. One thing that I've always thought about is when the conversations with friends of mine who are women and are nervous about walking home at night. And they say, guys, you don't know what it's like. We're constantly thinking about if someone's going to attack us. And I go, you know what? So do I. I constantly think about whether or not I'm going to get attacked. My brother got mugged about a year ago. And but the difference is, and this is the key difference, as a guy, I have been taught that I can fight back and there isn't a question. Because the toxic masculinity involved is I can defend myself. I've taught myself, I mean, like, I've taken martial arts because of learning that that's how you protect yourself. You're successful. And sorry, that sounds, I took it because I thought it was fun and I wanted to know how to defend myself, period. Not so I could be a winner. That's weird. But that's that subconscious level. That's that subconscious level of I can be the stronger one in a situation who can take care of myself. And because of that, when I walk down the street at night, I never have to worry about crossing the street. But if I hear someone walking behind me, my adrenaline spikes. And I've lived in Toronto my whole life, and in Scarborough for a good chunk of it. So you learned to be aware of the people around you on the street. But it was always okay, and then I'm going to fight them if something happens. Not I'm going to die. And that's the big difference in that conversation. Specifically at work, like a specific example is one time at work, I was working at Wonderland, and thankfully I don't remember the guy's name. I was going to say I won't say his name, but actually I don't remember his name. I was at Wonderland, and I was a technician in I think it was when we were working on Entertainment Tonight Special Edition Live. It was such a dumbass show. But I worked with a lot of really excellent people. But one guy I worked with was not bright. And he thought it would be funny to make fun of my friend who would eventually become my girlfriend. And I stepped in because it was a friend of mine who was being pushed around. And he was like hassling her and poking her and like taking her food. And he was basically being a petty bully. And just because he thought it was funny. And I stepped in and said and told him to stop. And he said, "What are you going to do?" I went, "What do you mean, what am I going to do? Just you're being an asshole. Cut it out." And he grabbed me in a workplace and threw me to the ground and climbed on top of me like play wrestling. Wow. And I'm like, the fuck is happening? And we're like in the kitchen. And so one of the things I learned a lot of in martial arts was groundwork and pressure points and stuff. And I also I was also made aware, because my sensei was a private investigator, about all the legal ramifications of this stuff. It's like, you have to warn people, you have to do this, you have to do that. I'm like, yeah, okay, no problem, whatever. I'm never getting out in a fight anyways. So here I am in a workplace, and I turtled up. So like, you bring your arms in and your knees in. So if someone's trying to grab you or whatever, then it's difficult for them to do so. And from that position, I'm like, because it's funny, all my instincts were to start wailing on him. And because that's the masculine answer to the situation. But instead, I just turtled up and I warned him 3 times. I made sure it was 3 times. And I said, if you don't stop now, it's going to hurt a lot. I don't know middle measures. I don't know how to make this fun. You're just going to be in pain. And he went, okay, yeah, whatever, ha, ha, ha. And he's laughing as he's like trying to pull my arm behind my back. And I just reached up and I hit the pressure point behind his ear, and he jumped up like he'd been set on fire. And I just dusted myself off and went, what was that? Like, how could you think that was acceptable? How is that, like, outside of workplace stuff, how does one person think that that's okay? And it's because amongst the guys, how do you, like, exert yourself and push yourself forward, you push, you wrestle, there's this physical aggression involved that you're taught in your gut that's how you respond to the world. If the world pushes you, you push back. If you have something, if you see something that you want, you take it. Like that was the 80s. I was a child in the 80s, but that was like the main ethos of the 80s was this cutthroat, and you can see it in business now. You can see it in Silicon Valley now. Move fast and break things. It's like push, fight, be aggressive, and you will be successful and win. And that is the and if you're not, then you're less than. Oh, you're a woman. Oh, you're a sissy.
You're not conforming to the idea of masculinity because strength equals dominance equals power.
Exactly. When I've always been someone who's like, hey, let's all work together and get along, and that's cool. And so
that's the human answer. Like,
yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it's just like that's what a person does. It doesn't like Jacob was saying, like there's like this idea that like if you're a man, then you need to adhere to like all these like standards of violence and aggression that you all have been discussing. It's like, what about just being a human and like using your words? Like it always goes back to, and we talk about this in every episode, and I'm getting fucking heated, but like it always goes back to like what we learn as children is like to treat others the way you would like to be treated, and to use your words, to share, to like work with other people. It's not difficult to be a nice fucking person. You know what I mean? So like I get upset when I hear shit like this because it's just not hard to be like, don't hit me, please.
It's just like, have we really not evolved to know that we need to like not put our hands on each other? Like, I don't understand how we're like still figuring that out. But yeah, it's crazy to me that we haven't moved past that yet.
And I think a lot of it has to do with just, it's exactly what you're saying, Julia and Jess, where it's like these concepts are relatively simple for us to grasp. Like, what is it? What's the missing factor to the ease of this? Like, what is it that we're not quite understanding? And I just really go back to like, look at the world in which we live in and these figureheads that we have. Look at this man who I won't dare speak his name. Luckily, he's getting ousted from that White House today. But you look at these figures and you look at these things that like, you kind of look at humanity as like the trajectory of humanity, and essentially a lot of the major events that like we've seen as humanity have to do with brute strength. Like, for example, I think about the fact that we live on stolen land currently. How did we get to acquire the stolen land? Through dominance and through eradications of people through genocide, aka violence. So it's like and then you think about the wars of the world, World War I, World War II. You think about Black Lives Matter. How did those people deal with Black Lives Matter? Brute violence through police brutality. How did those people in the Capitol storm it? Brute force with assault weapons and an intention, and an awful intention. So it's like, how do we take this thing called violence that is at the root of toxic masculinity and break it? How do we do that on a macro and micro level? Because even there are times where like people make me angry, and sometimes my instinct is to like, oh, I just want to push them. And I'm like, why do I go there? Why is it my instinct to go there, and how do I destroy that? How do I mitigate that being my very first intent? So I see what you're saying. It's like, what's the missing piece here?
Mm-hmm.
I think we have to remember that we're all, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way. I mean this in a biological way. We're all animals.
We're animals.
Mm.
Yeah, like at the root of it, when we feel threatened or we feel at risk, then generally we respond with a fight or flight. And that's just an instinctive thing. And I think that when people are aggressive, and when you focus on that aggression and fighting back, it's usually you're focusing on the self. When you're thinking about winning, generally it's like being dominant. It's about the self. So, and it's usually a very selfish thing, because it is a very challenging, and I think human isn't the right word, because humans are also sometimes monsters. It's a much more generous frame of mind and a more difficult frame. It is harder to get along. It is harder to stop and take a breath than it is to lash out. But you're taught as a kid that fighting is what boys do. They're just boys. Boys will be boys. That's fine.
Oh,
That's cool.
God.
And yeah, I know, but I agree, but I'm saying, and you still hear it today to a certain extent. Boys will be boys. And it's not as prevalent because now I have a new, like now she's a teenager, for Pete's sake. But growing up, my daughter navigating the schoolyard with boys, they are the ones who are aggressive and loud, and they're told that they can be aggressive and loud. And to be fair, their instinct is to be aggressive and loud, just like the girls for the most part. It depends on personalities. Personalities are personalities, and different people have different responses growing up. But if your instinct and your base, like kind of basic personality as you're moving your way through the world is, I'm out there and I want the thing and I'm going to take the thing, and you're told, okay, well, yeah, that's to be expected, versus don't do that, that's not acceptable. And that happens in both directions for, I shouldn't say both. Like sometimes they're told to curtail it, and sometimes they're told that it's okay or understandable, or at least it's like, no, you really shouldn't, but what are you going to do? And if I had $1 for every parent of a child who said, what am I supposed to do? Like, parent, for Pete's sake, talk to your kid, talk with your kid. And that I had, oh man, I just got really emotional.
We're gonna get into that too. Emotions with men, but go ahead.
I know I need a breath. When I found out I was having a daughter, I was super excited. I honestly didn't want I had no preference about what gender my kid should or could be. And we didn't know, there are so few true surprises in the world. We didn't know that Abby was going to be Abby until she was born. So I didn't know I was going to have a daughter until the delivery room. So, but then when it sunk in that I had a daughter, I was like, oh man, what have I done? Because moving through the world as a girl is a much more challenging experience. And not that it's not challenging for boys. There are different, and this is part of the conversation, the pressures and forces in the society that tell you who you should be are just as toxic in both directions. But the directions and the forces that are telling you about how to be a boy and how to be a man in this world are based on how to be the best winner and dominant, as opposed to how to be the best subservient, quiet personality. And society is set up to, in our society, in the patriarchy,
Your top dog in this patriarchy is what, essentially, like straight cis, yeah.
Absolutely. No, that's what I was going to say. I was like, I'm great. Like, I'm
You won the lottery.
a cishet. I'm a cishet white dude in a patriarchal society, and to know, and I'm very self-aware of that, so to bring a girl into the world who has now come out as queer makes me go, oh man, I've got your back, kid.
Yeah.
But there's a different level of concern there, because I know that the risks are greater.
For sure. Well, actually,
and because I'm conscious of that.
I was going to say one thing, which this is just from our perspective. I want to get back to you guys quickly, but when you were talking about the fight or flight response, what I noticed with at least myself and a lot of the girls that I'm friends with is that we do not have the fight instinct. That is not our first instinct.
Right.
We are, and I think like girls get this bad rap of being like we're like psychologically tricking you and we play mind games and we're like calculated and whatever. But it's really just having to do with the fact that we have to be pro negotiators to get through life. Like, we can't really stand up for ourselves. All we can do is be like, well, what if we, and like, we try to negotiate and compromise, and that's our way. That is our tool to kind of get a man to calm down. Like, we can really only go so far. So if someone is coming at me from, like, you know, I'm walking down an alley and someone's coming to attack me, my instinct is get away, not fight as soon as they touch you. It's because we don't have a chance. Look, there is no chance. There is just
My response is, I'm dying today. Like,
yeah, it's just frozen.
I just accept the fact that it's the end of my life. Like, I don't even, and you know what, Gavin, like, it's really interesting that you brought that up because, like, in like my own relationship, whatever, like, just as things are progressing, you talk about things. And like, my first worry was like, oh my God, if I have a girl, like, it's kind of like that same response that, Daisy has in The Great Gatsby, where it's like, I just hope she can be like a stupid little girl, or like in that sense, just because like you want them to have blinders up in a way because you don't want them to see all this shit. You know that their journey is going to be like difficult at like right off the bat because you are inferior. The second it's like, it's a boy, it's a girl, it's the second you are announced as a woman or a girl, you are immediately inferior. And like, I think we all struggle with that because from that comes like whatever feminine qualities that you possess make you inferior. And I think that's the conversation, right? It's like, Gavin, you got emotional. What are you, fucking sissy? Like, not that I would ever say that about you because I love you to death, but like, I think it's so important. Listen to me. I think it's so important to have those qualities because again, it's what builds you as a human being.
Yeah, like these are things that we all know and like we're all trying to like work towards. Yeah, like it's like what Gavin was saying, but it just sucks to know that like as a man, if you're gonna be attacked, like you think that you just need to fight. Like it's almost just as scary, you know, which I can totally sympathize with. And so I loved that point that you were making.
And I should point out, and it's stupid because you don't know, like I'm taught that I could be, I learned to defend myself so I could be strong enough in that situation, but that person can always be stronger. And instead I could have a conversation. But it's interesting. It's like, I've got my hands wrapped around my keys, but not in a, oh God, so I hope I don't die. It's, I hope I'm faster.
Yeah. It's like this grand assumption that like, yeah, boys are just supposed to fight back. Like, you're fine. It's like, that's a simple way of looking at it. I don't know if every guy,
it's a potential even playing field.
Yeah.
Which is a very, very different conversation than someone who's much stronger than you is going to attack you.
I would say it's only different. Sorry to interrupt you, but I would say it's only different in terms of like rape cases because I would think that yes, they're coming after you more for like money, to mug you, whatever. But for women, it's more like, let me get you behind this, you know. So it's a little different that way, just in terms of numbers.
Absolutely.
But yeah, like, and
also the threat involved.
But yeah, but fear is fear. So, and like Julia was saying, emotions are emotions. We all have them. And that's sort of where I think we wanted to wrap up the conversation, is just because I have a ton of guy friends where I've been to funerals with them and they just can't, they're like sucking it back, not letting themselves cry. And I've asked them about it before and they're just like, no, I just don't need to. But I can see that they do. Like, it's seriously, I've had conversations with some guys where I'm like, just cry. But I wanted to know like what that experience has been with you guys in terms of being emotional, being in touch with your emotions. What would you guys say about that?
Let's start with Jacob.
I think masculinity has made it very unhealthy for a lot of men. When you're small and like your parents yell at you and you're like welling up in tears, for my parents, a big thing they say is don't cry, right? And then you don't, and then you grow up being desensitized. You're desensitized, but at the same time, you can feel everything like kind of building to a climax inside of you until one day you just like break.
Yeah.
And like it's been really unhealthy in my adult life because like something subconsciously, I think, like, I only let myself cry like 2 times a year, which is super unhealthy.
Gavin's like, what?
Do you schedule it? Like,
Oh, no, it's like, it's April 23rd, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's go.
But that's, it's like you were saying, like I think men do disassociate, like learn how to do it at a younger age, because they're just like, well, I can't, so I'm just going to not be here, is what's going to happen. Like mentally.
Something that was a little funny, like, did not plan it, but when I went to New York, my parents took me to go see Wicked, and the second the curtain opened, I just started crying for no reason, and I was like, what's happening? And that was like my one big cry of the year. But I feel like that's why I have a lot of respect for Gavin, because he is like really in touch with his emotions. He lets it come out in very healthy ways. And like, yeah, that's something I aspire to, and I'm working on in my adult life to fix myself before my 30s.
I was going to say, being emotional is not a problem for me. I've always been very emotional. I always wear my heart on my sleeve, and I have since I was a child. I definitely hear the points being said, and I respond to them with this idea of, when it comes to like this idea of like, it's interesting because I feel like our conversation today has like shifted between toxic masculinity and just this idea of masculinity even in and of itself. One of which, like I said, is so far-fledged and so beyond now that I don't even think we as people don't even know the realm of what this idea of masculinity is anymore, because it permeates into everything and it's just so far-fledged. But I've always felt within the men in my life, there's been a lack of showing vulnerability, because to show vulnerability is to show weakness, is to take away from that domineering factor that we have always been taught as men to uphold. We are the leaders of this family. We need to be stoic. We need to hold ourselves directly. Like, we need to, showing emotion is to show that inferiority that we often associate with women. Because very often, even in politics or what have you, as soon as a woman offers her opinion and she gets even the slightest bit passionate, deemed emotional. Anytime somebody who is not within that patriarchy of a white cis man offers their passionate opinion, and I say passionate to drive home, that's the truth of what it is, it's deemed emotional. And I definitely suffered from that growing up, where it was like the minute I would start to cry, or the minute that I would begin to like get insular and get emotional, my opinion didn't matter anymore, or my experience all of a sudden lost its weight or its gravity, because it was no longer rooted in this place of stoicness. And that's something that I hope one day, should I ever have children and should they choose to identify under, you know, a masculine expression. Yeah, being in touch with your emotions, allowing the ability, like even like seeing you have that tender moment, Gavin, is like that. I view that as a moment of power for you. Like, that's awesome to see you, like, because it just shows me that you care and that you're in touch with you're in touch with yourself, and you center yourself in a place of truth. And I don't think enough men do that. I don't think enough men hold people accountable for that. I also don't think that a lot of men just simply ask, how are you? How are you doing? And mean it in the way that we've meant it in this discussion. So I think that a lot of work that needs to be done is that we just need to tell our boys growing up that being vulnerable is power. It does not make you insular. It does not make you weak. It gives you power, and it gives you a awareness and a grounding in the world that is so, so important to move through life with. So, yeah, I've always been emotional just because that's been my truth. And I think over time, I've just learned what to be emotional about just through my own life experiences. Because, like, being this privileged person, I'm like, okay, like, because I'm the kind of person who, if I hear somebody sing beautifully, like a technically beautiful performance of singing, like, I'm in tears. And I'm like, that's not an important thing to be in tears about, but, like, you just kind of learn. Anyways, that's my 2 cents. Just knowing that your emotions are power. It's powerful.
You said that beautifully.
When any person is emotional, when any person takes that moment to show us vulnerability, like, this whole idea, like, we've been taught that when somebody gets vulnerable, we're like we're taught to lean back and be like, oh, they're having a moment. Like, we need to just let that happen. But like in my adult life, like the minute I see that, like now on anybody, like I can't help but want to lean in. It tells me more about why that person is that person and where they come from. Mm-hmm. And just, again, being an adult, like, you just see things more critically. Like, there are so many people in my life now who I know that I was like, when I was a child, I viewed you this way. But now that I'm an adult and I've been through A, B, C, D, E, F, G experience, I view you in this new way, and it's because you're not in touch with your heart space. Yeah. So to see people offer that is a very powerful thing. And I think the more that we can teach our boys to make space for that and know that the space is permissible and accepted and encouraged, we could be in a whole different world and essentially have an entirely different discussion today. Anyways, I'm done. I'm done talking.
I mean, I'm really fortunate in a way that for all the weird things that happened when I was growing up, like my parents are divorced and they've been married multiple times to different people, and my dad raised me from, like, my brother and I were with my dad since I was 7. So we grew up in a man's household. It was not a balanced household. The women in my life, like, there was my mom until I was 7, and then rotating cast of characters for a little while until we eventually got to meet my stepmom, who's great. My current stepmom, who's great. That's an important caveat. So she's awesome. So in retrospect, I'm surprised I didn't have a much more masculine toxic masculine upbringing, if that makes any sense. But I think my dad was kind of in his own headspace for a lot of it, just trying to figure out how to take care of kids. But I don't remember him actively being on our case about showing emotions. He was a like a rock musician, and like prog rock is also pretty testosterone-y. But even then, he's always, I didn't really appreciate it until I was much older and my stepmom was talking to me about it. But he's a big smoosh ball. And so he never got on my case for being emotional. And so I'm really fortunate in that. I think I'm a lot emotionally healthier for that. But I have a personal philosophy that men are taught to not show emotion, to bottle everything up, and then I just see them lash out at other people because of that. And sometimes, and because it all comes out eventually. We talk to Abby. I don't remember where we got the idea. We talked to Abby about the idea of their bucket is empty. I don't know if you guys have heard that before.
Yes, I've heard it in a well analogy, like your well's half empty, half full kind of idea.
Yeah, exactly. So we think about everyone having a bucket, and then and that's basically how much emotional love and support that you have. And that sometimes Abby would meet bullies at school, and they were boys, sometimes they were girls, and we talk about them having an empty bucket. And then if you were trying to, within reason, generous back to that person and realize that, especially as little kids, they're coming at this place from usually a place of hurt or rejection or something like that, and they're just lashing out on somebody else. And that's something that when you reach out to them and you're generous to them, then all of a sudden they turn around. Like, it's amazing to see the kids switch that quickly, and adults are the same way.
Yeah, everybody just needs attention, really, a healthy amount of attention.
Well, it isn't just about attention. It's about love. And I think one really unfortunate thing about our society is it's very... we are all taught still to this day that to, like, despite all the progressive conversations, if you are a man and you have genuine, honest to goodness affection for another man, then you're gay. Mm-hmm. That's it. It doesn't matter if that love's platonic. It doesn't matter if you're showing genuine affection and understanding and love and support for another man, well, you're gay. And I hear that from my gay friends. Yeah. And they're like, oh, those two guys, they're really close. they're close, they're gay. And I'm like, what? So what you're taught is that, this is the other thing, is that there is no such thing as a platonic love for a man. The only reason men love is to have sex, which is also not true. So
I want to hop in very quickly and say what you're getting at is like a super important conversation that, like, if you want to have us back to like talk about it, like, but anyways, no, because what I was saying is like everything that you're saying right now, like within all of these marginalized communities, like every single thing that there are problems within the world is a microcosm of what exists in marginalized communities. Because I was going to say, like, within the queer community, even in and of itself, this very idea you're talking about is prevalent, it's rampant, it's disgusting, and it's like, it's amazing. It's amazing. It's really like, it's a microcosm is what it is. It permeates everything.
I remember, like, this is such a weird tangent, but I remember people getting really, really angry about the Sherlock, Benedict Cumberbatch Sherlock. I don't know if you guys have watched it at all, but Holmes and Watson love each other. But it's platonic, according to the scriptwriters. And there are a bunch of people who are saying, no, you monsters, they're gay, don't you see that? And the idea that it can't be acceptable that two men can love each other and not want to have sex together, and that it's not romantic, is so foreign in so many people's brains that, again, men can't be passionate and emotionally connected to other people unless they romantically want to have sex with them. That's it. That's what we're told by society. And I told a good friend of mine that I teach with, and I sat down one day and basically said, look, I just wanted to have a heart-to-heart with him and say, look, we've been dancing around with this, like, discomfort of us both competing for the same thing, but I just want you to know, like, I love you. And he went, okay. Okay. Because imagine anyone saying that to I really respect him, I really care for him, and that's not an okay thing for guys to say to each other. And I kind of make it my mission to let people know how awesome they are, because I think just generally in life people don't do that enough of each other, for each other. And but as a man standing in front of a room full of people who I'm now entrusted to teach, which is terrifying, the idea in my own brain that I have that responsibility, that weight of responsibility. I also, the reason I shy away from it is because it hampers the communication. But I find that I get emotional because I'm tapping into this, and because when I speak honestly and openly, then I get emotional about it. So, God damn it. So, but you can see what I'm doing. Like, now I'm starting to well up a little bit, and that's hampering my communication, which is frustrating. And people get distracted about the fact that I'm emotional and aren't necessarily listening to what I'm saying. So I find that a big pain in the ass. But, and it's why I don't perform anymore. It's because I would get emotional on stage, and then I just start to lose it. People would be like, what's the matter with you? This is like a comedy bit. But I think that as long as, if people are honestly emotional with themselves, emotionally honest with themselves is what I meant to say, then they can be emotionally honest with others, and both are incredibly difficult, and everyone has too many walls up, and men's are the thickest and the highest. So and it's going to take a long time for people to understand. I really like what Zach had said, that emotion, like being confident enough and open enough with your emotions, is a strength, because your words are more honest and your support and love is more honest. Then you can communicate that to others. Then that means that you can bond better as human beings, and you can do better things.
Yeah, there's something to be said about crying, where it's just this like total mind, body, soul connection, where it's like all you can do is just really feel like everything that you're feeling in that moment. And to have it come out physically, like through tears, is just validating. That's like, no, this is actually how I feel, or I wouldn't be like bawling my eyes out right now. So yeah, it's a great moment of honesty.
And Gavin, I think you mentioned a great point, and in that if we just told each other how much more we appreciate each other and normalize that, then like there wouldn't be such a weirdness around like getting emotional sometimes, or just like that platonic relationship that you were talking about. So thank you for bringing that up, because we also end every podcast with telling each other how much we love each other, which we'll do in a few minutes.
I think it annoys other people, but
yeah, but
whatever.
It's okay. But that's a great way to segue into it. So at least Gavin said it this time.
I love that you're a dad, because, and I know like Julie and I like talk about this like all the time, but like I think her and I, as well with a lot of girls and boys, I think a lot of us we have this coming of age moment where one day you understand your father and you're like, that's what you are. Got it. Because I think it's really confusing as a kid when you're like looking at your dad and you're like, why are you the way that you are? It's just for me, like sometimes with my dad, I'm just like, I don't understand you at all. And, or at least in high school, like it was really hard for us to level with each other. But now that I've gotten older and I've learned about like the patriarchy, societal pressures, toxic masculinity, all that stuff, I'm like, I get you now. I understand.
Can I please interrupt? Because I also want to talk about this from a queer perspective. Because I know for me, I definitely growing up had, my differences with my dad. And frankly, like in terms of politics, in terms of things like just our varying walks of life, we continue to have those differences, with respect being at the very root of it. Mm-hmm. But there were so many times growing up where like, my dad was an oppressor to me. And there were things that like I specifically shared with my mom that I made an intent to not share with my dad, because, I knew what that response would be from him, and I knew that it would hinder me in ways. And I knew it was a protection mechanism. Like it was something to save myself. But essentially what I wanted to say on your point is this idea of like, you get to know people. And in the getting to know people, the biggest thing that I've learned is I'm like, you know what? You on the surface right now, I'm not responding well to you. You're making me feel some type of way. But the older I've gotten, the more I've learned to extend grace to people, and to extend copious amounts of grace to people, because they're just doing what and I like to believe this is the human spirit, with obviously some major exceptions, Trump, but everybody's just trying. I know I said I wasn't going to say his name, but here we are. Everybody's just trying to do their best with what they know. And what I've learned about my dad through having reflected on the traumatic things in my childhood was that you were doing what you felt was best for me in that time. You were doing what you were taught to save me and to give me less of a hard time. And we even had an honest conversation maybe 2 years ago, because we were talking about a family that we knew. We were talking about somebody who I knew who recently had come out as queer, and their parents were not very accepting of it. And my dad was like talking this whole like, that's horrible. And I have 2 queer sons, and like, I just can't even imagine. I was like, you can't imagine? I'm like, well, I need you to account for what it was like growing up with you, because it's interesting to hear you say this now. Anyways, I digress, but ultimately we had this really beautiful conversation where, we finally had that moment where we could address the things that like, distanced us in my childhood, and things that needed to be said. And it was the fact that it's like, I don't hold that against you, because I see your heart space, and I offer you grace in the sense that you were operating on what you knew at the time. And now that you've seen me grow, and you've seen me come into the person I am, and I've witnessed you do better and know better, that's an important thing to bring to this conversation as well, is that in some respects, offering grace to people can do much good for that person, but even more good for yourself in grounding your heart in what happened.
That's a lovely place to leave it. Guys, thank you so much. This was such a great conversation. Like, Julie and I, we talk about it just privately, but we're so glad that you guys agreed to do this. Like, thank you so much.
I think this is an important conversation to have also, like, and getting all your perspectives on it is, again, Jessica said it, like, it honestly means the world to us. You all mean the world to us. We love you all so, so, so much. And hopefully we can just extend a bit of grace to everybody that need it, because sometimes people just need a little bit of love in their life.
People be going through shit,
Yeah.
Yeah. Everyone's doing their
And we're also in the middle of a pandemic, and people are not fucking themselves right now. Like, that came out wrong. People are just.
I think people are
That
fucking
came out
themselves
wrong.
right
That
now, though.
People, they are fucking.
Okay. Let me rephrase by saying people are not themselves right now. So extend grace to those people who piss you off in macro and micro ways, because people be going through shit, you know?
They
Yeah.
stress.
Huh?
They're stressed. They're tired.
Thank you all so much. This has been so much fun. We can't thank you enough for coming on. And not for anything, listeners.
That's our season 2 premiere.
That's our season 2 premiere.
Yay!
Thank you guys
Oh, sorry,
so
should be doing
much.
this.
It was great. Yes, it was great.
Not for anything, but it was a great conversation.